Welcome to Perspectives, the vodcast of the American Mental Health Counselors Association with the National President and Interim CEO/ED, Dr. Beverly Smith. This vodcast will bring to you the perspectives of clinical mental health counseling as it pertains to ethics, public policy and legislation, multiculturalism and social justice, as well as leadership and advocacy. This vodcast will feature experts in the clinical mental health counseling field to enhance the work of clinical professionals and to inform the public. The American Mental Health Counselors Association advocates for over 130,000 licensed clinical mental health counselors in the United States who are licensed to assess, diagnose, and treat mental disorders. We are the only organization working exclusively for clinical mental health counselors. Join the Perspectives for insight from experts on wellness in daily living, current clinical research, integrative healthcare, as well as how to maintain personal, family, and organizational wellness in an anxious and ever-changing world. Let's connect and hear the perspectives.
Hello, I'm Dr. Beverly Smith, President and Interim CEO/ED of the American Mental Health Counselors Association. This is the month of May, and we're launching our broadcast called Perspective to bring more awareness to May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. I have a special guest with me this evening. Not really a guest to AMCA, but yet a guest on Perspective. We have Mr. Tony Onorato. He is the Regional Director at Large for AMCA, as well as he has his own private practice, APO Counseling. Tony, share with us who you are, a little bit more about who you are.
Well, thanks, Beverly. I really appreciate being on this with you and the opportunity to talk a little bit about mental health things. Obviously, we're geared toward a little bit more of people with mental health backgrounds, but the awareness part of this is obviously incredibly important. So yes, my background is that I've been in private practice for 24 years, maybe something along those lines. It's a small group practice, had different therapists who've been here over the period of the years, but and so we've been in existence for a little while. The part I spend most of my time with is do a lot of relationship counseling and a significant amount of like depression, particularly anxiety, performance anxieties. Which I guess dovetails a little bit with my background in athletics. So there's a lot of performance anxiety because of that. And my undergrad was in sports psychology, actually. So those are the things that sort of brought me into the profession. That's what I spend most of my time working on. I used to have a certification in addictions, but I ended up dropping that after a while. But I definitely still work a lot with addictions. And I don't know, and you're probably aware of this too. It's almost impossible to work with anybody that there isn't some addiction thing or some traumatic element of life that either they've experienced or family members experience that is impacting their overall well-being and functioning. So we're not well versed in that stuff. We're in trouble, I think.
I agree with you. You said you've had over 24 some odd years of experience in counseling, clinical mental health counseling. With that experience, coupled with the fact that this is the month of mental health awareness, based on your experiences, what would be the foremost message you would deliver to the public, if you will, on the importance of mental health awareness?
Well, I think that when you're talking about the mental health awareness part of it, I guess the question is, what are we asking people to be aware of? Certainly there are breakdowns that occur, and we witness the behaviors and symptoms and signs of those breakdowns, and that's certainly very, very important. But I think, to be honest with you, the part I'd like to be more focused on, and as a profession I think we try to be this focused on, is the actual health and wellness part of that, right? What actually helps people be healthy, what helps them do well. We're all going to encounter difficult obstacles and circumstances throughout our lives at various points in time. Some of them are more severe, some are less severe. And the question really is how do we work our way through those things in a way that we still can live and enjoy our lives, even though some of that stuff is really very difficult, right? And the fact that that people might struggle with that is it's always ironic to me that, if I don't do my own taxes anymore, right? Because I use my accountant to do that because they're a little complicated, especially when you're owning businesses or several businesses. And I don't have that area of expertise. So I rely on my accountant really heavily for that kind of stuff. And and as well as for legal things that, that obviously impact the practice, I rely on my attorney a lot for. My background in athletics, we have coaches that help us work our way through things, help us figure out how to get better and do that part. And I don't see mental health as being any different than that. It's simply about you need some help figuring out how to work through something and get better at dealing with something, get better at figuring out how to enjoy your life. And the idea that we intrinsically would have a great knowledge of how we're supposed to do all that without actually having a training or going through it is ludicrous. And that it's not a weakness. It's simply a matter of learning and training and figuring things out. If I don't know what I don't know, and why are we making why do we make it difficult for people who just haven't figured out how to do something? And instead of just saying, hey, there's ways of doing that, find a good way of doing that, and talk to these people who have some expertise in walking you through that process.
I agree. When I listen to you talk, I can't help but to ask the question, how did your background in sports, how did it impact, how did it help you as a therapist or becoming a therapist?
I think for a couple of reasons. Number one is you definitely experienced the struggle, right? I mean, especially it doesn't really matter what level you're on, whether it's working youth sports or like in high school, or I competed in college, or whether you've gone on to international or professional competition. You are trying to achieve goals and dreams that are usually fairly lofty, at least they are for you and what you're doing. So they're not easy to do. Other people are attempting to do that too. So the potential stresses and strains of where you're comparing yourself to where you are on that path, whether you feel like you have a good path or not, and the dealings of internally of your confidence levels, and especially when things aren't going all that well, which is going to happen. And you work your way through that. It's really what brought me into the profession, to be honest with you, is I knew that I had to be better suggestions than stay positive and just relax, right? There have to be better things than that.
True.
And obviously there are. And so that stuff has helped me tremendously. I think from a sports psych standpoint really helped me understand what optimal performance really looks like and how to help people achieve that part of it. Obviously the counseling part and going through the master's program I really learned a lot about where the breakdowns and how pathology starts to occur. And the combination of those two things has been incredibly helpful for me in my experience in working with people, knowing that everybody's trying to live, their best life in some way. And there's challenges to doing that. And it's just kind of normal. And I think that's kind of the background I took from sports. And some of it is I think this part, to be honest with you, Beverly, if I synthesize it down, is you have to learn how to be okay with being uncomfortable. And the process I think I work with people is learn to be okay with being uncomfortable. It's all right. The discomfort isn't the problem, right? If I run from the discomfort, then it's hard to grow and develop. And I think hopefully I can bring that. I think sometimes it is a confidence that you're going to be okay, even though you're uncomfortable. You just got to keep hanging in there a little while. We keep working on these things until you start to see some progress, which is going to take some repetitions.
It's interesting you said that, and I like that phrase, being okay with being uncomfortable. I think that's important. And when I think about Mental Health Awareness Month, if we had a message to give people just to help them a little bit along the way, can be okay and be comfortable with being uncomfortable, but yet have the confidence and try to see the light at the end of the tunnel. You have to imagine it's there and have the confidence that, hey, I can ride these waves out. It's going to be okay eventually. Just it's a rough patch. but also, doing the work. Doing the work is important, I think, as well. And that's why I guess we're in the business that we're in, to help people process and to do the journey, and to journey with them. As Go ahead, you were going to say.
No, I was just going to say, that I think the hardest part for anybody is when you're in the middle of something, it never feels like it's going to end.
Mm-hmm.
And I think then, and I think that's part of what we bring as a profession, is some perspective on that, right? There's always a beginning, a middle, and an ending. Some of those are relatively short cycles, and some of them are a little longer.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the process of everything. They're all waves. They come in, they crest, and they go back out. That's the way life works. And so when you're in the middle of it, though, or the middle of the storm, it doesn't feel like that's ever going to end. And I think some of the biggest advantages we bring to people is as that guide through the storm. Like this, I know this is the rough part. It gets better later on, and because we've had a lot of experience in helping people through these processes, we know it gets better later on because we do this every day.
True. And so, interesting, we do it every day. And one of the things I found that I do is sometimes hold out hope for people who maybe don't have the hope or have the strength at the moment. That's an important aspect. And I know, I'm sure you do the same thing, is to help hold out hope for individuals as they're journeying through the storms, or just trying to make it through.
Exactly. I mean, I think those are the things that draw me into the profession, right? To be able to do that, and watching the progress people make, and watching them start to seeing the light bulb turn on every once in a while, and they get some of those experiences and recognize that there are these little subtle changes do make a difference over a period of time, and watching people learn how to enjoy their life again if they had a time where they didn't, or enjoy it maybe sometimes for the first time, which is sadder, but also really very rewarding and kind of fun too.
Yeah, that's true. Again, we're in May, Mental Health Awareness Month, and I always think every year, what can we do to increase the awareness of the importance of self-care, or just increase the awareness of mental health awareness? Is there anything you think we could do, or should be doing more of, should be doing less of, just to increase the awareness of mental health?
It's hard for me to envision that people obviously aren't aware of mental health. The question is, where do they rank it in priority or importance in relation to the other things that they're dealing with, right? And a lot of times that is taken a back seat, right? So it's sort of like being in a crisis situation. Like, you can push through that stuff for a little while, but there's a point in which there's diminishing return, and where do we start to break down from that stuff? And that self-care, that self-awareness, the analogy I like to use with people most of the time is in regard to the breakdowns that start to occur, that is a normal, natural part of everything, is if anybody follows any kind of racing sport whatsoever, the higher performance the vehicle is, the more demand you place on it, the higher the level of maintenance that's required in order to help it run like that. And so we're human beings, and we require maintenance. That shouldn't be like news to anybody. We require maintenance, and not all that maintenance is just physical stuff. Like, drink some water, get some food that's nutritious for you, maybe do some exercise, and get some sleep. Those are like the main basic things, right? But in part of that is, make sure that you are connected to things that bring fulfillment into your life, whatever that might be. It's great if it's something you can make a living at doing. That's wonderful. If it's not, you have to make sure you're finding that in other things. And that you have some quality relationships in your life, that people, as part of the maintenance, right, that people contribute something and you're contributing something to them that makes life enjoyable and easier, and more fun. I think, to me, that's part of the maintenance. And I look at that in kind of three ways, right? It sort of like, if you know what's important to you, that helps you prioritize and where you're going to spend your time. If you are good at identifying where your strengths are, that allows you to work from your strengths as you approach things, and to be able to focus on the things you can control, not to get so focused on the other stuff. I think those are the basic tenets of how our structure and our system works. And when we get away from that, you're getting kind of out of the design parameters, and we don't work very well when we do that. To me, it's from an awareness standpoint, it's an increased awareness of what helps, what's the design function in the first place, and how do we maximize that so that we're not outside of it so often. You get outside the design parameters, you're going to have breakdowns every single time. It's why we don't use hammers to etch glass. They're great for smashing it, but if you want to make a nice little intricate detail, a hammer's not your tool, right? It's not designed for that. And there are certain things we're designed for and certain things we're not. And there's certain skill sets we have and certain ones we don't, for each individual person. And the better understanding you have of that, I think those are the things I would like from a mental health and a mental awareness standpoint, is to figure out, is to help people learn that this isn't rocket science on the one hand, but there is a formula to it in how you take care of yourself better so that you can meet life's challenges more efficiently and more effectively.
That's true. Self-care has become somewhat of a buzzword of the last few years, particularly in the midst of a pandemic and as everyone we're navigating. You hear a lot of people talk about self-care, self-care. Have we normalized that word too much, do you think?
I guess it depends on what you mean by that, right? So if self-care means that I take a break, that certainly can be self-care. It's just that we're sometimes in situations where you can't take a break. You know what I mean? And so, for example, I think I said this before. I grew up in the construction business, and I actually worked pouring concrete when I was in college. And when the company that you're working for orders the concrete, and they put it in the truck and they add water to it, you are committed to the end. There's no stop. So when it comes, they deliver it, you pour it out on the ground, and you have to make sure that it's in the form and in the thing that you want it to be by the time it gets hard. Because if it doesn't, you're tearing it out and you're putting something new in, right? So you're committed to that. You don't get to take a break. But the question is, in that process, is what am I doing to prepare myself to deal with the demand of that, number one. And then number two is, I'm going to need some rest afterwards, right? So I know that the self-care part has to be, you got to recharge. The question is, what form does recharge come in? Some people, it's I take a break. Some people, they go mountain climbing. You know what I mean? Which is not really a break for me. That'd scare the crap out of me, but that's what somebody does for entertainment and to get fulfillment. So, I had a friend of mine who loved skydiving all the time. Great. And I'd like to do that once or twice, but I don't know if that would be the thing that would recharge me all the time. So it's different things for different people. And I think our tendency over time has been to talk about this self-care as either taking a break or removing the stressors and things like that, but that's not always possible. It's kind of figuring out how to manage them a little bit better, and where you have the opportunities to recharge yourself to make sure you take full advantage of that.
Okay. Now, if we had to deliver a message to clinicians versus those who are not clinicians about Mental Health Awareness Month, what would the message be, and what would be the delineating factors, or how would we delineate that message?
Well, that's a good question, Beverly.
I know, right? That's a good question. We'll talk through it together. It's called perspectives, so it's okay to share a perspective.
There are times I think that we as a profession sometimes potentially add to the perceived stigma of coming and assisting for help, because we make it really mysterious in a lot of ways. I mean, this is something, it doesn't occur. It would be figuring out how to help normalize it for people. So, because everything occurs behind some closed door somewhere that nobody sees and nobody's ever part of. And I think part of our challenge in that is how we figure out how to, as professionals, how to help normalize that process for people and make it less of an unknown and less scary in that sense. And and people aren't super fragile. um, and I think sometimes we inadvertently treat them sometimes as being very fragile. Certainly there are people who are in dire straits related to something. That's a little bit different issue, but the vast majority of the public's not all that fragile at every given point in time. And I think that sometimes discourages people from coming in, because if I have to think of myself as being like super fragile, or I'm the alcoholic that has to be like under the bridge before I actually come in for treatment, that gives a false sense of where we can be helpful and when in those processes. And maybe that's part of what we can do as mental health professionals is sort of I'm going to try to think of the right word, right?
To help destigmatize it, because when you said that, it came to my mind. We still have a responsibility to help destigmatize mental health care and who comes in for mental health care. And I think that's important when you said that, because when we connect all of this to self-care and what we're talking about now, we have to be mindful that we send the message that mental health care is for everyone. And it doesn't matter where you are on the continuum. If you are selling high, then still, what about your mental health? What can you do to enhance it? And if you're in a place where you're struggling a little bit more, well, still, what can you do to enhance it? And just saying mental health is for everyone, because actually all of us have mental health. It's just a matter of if it's healthy at this moment, not healthy, but all of us have mental health. And honestly, all of us in our lives have had great experiences. And reality, if you're of, I don't want to say of age, but if you've had experience, that sounds like I'm older, right? If you've had experiences of life, we've all had those moments whereas we need some additional support or resources to help us navigate. And it doesn't matter what our economic background is, what our educational status is, or who we're affiliated with. We all just needed some additional support at some point in our lives. So I think normalizing the message, as you said, that mental health is for everyone. Mental health care is for everyone.
I like the way that you said that. It sort of reminds me of like in being in physical shape. Somebody said to me, "Oh, I got to be better." Well, look, everybody's in shape. The question is what kind. And what kind of thing
exercising them.
And mental health is like that too. Everybody has mental health, and at certain points in time we're doing better with it than at others. And the idea that that it's just a process of figuring out how you learn to elevate where you are if you want to, or in some cases if you are trying to find a good maintenance course or whatever the heck it is, right? It's trying to figure out how to get to those places. And our expertise, particularly the counseling profession, our expertise is really about walking people through that in a very efficient and effective way. It's just a conversation that you're having, and it's not. I think people get scared a little bit too, Beverly, about some of the diagnostic terms, the bipolar disorders or the schizophrenia or things along those lines, or particularly personality disorders and that kind of stuff. And nobody wants to have those, and it certainly scares people. It's like nobody wants to have cancer. So there's a process there, and I think sometimes when we're talking about clinicians, being able to explain things to people in non-clinical terms and just regular lay terms and how we're discussing that, I think becomes very, very important when we're communicating with the public about how we do that part of it. As opposed to if I'm communicating with another clinician, I might use more clinical terms, but when you're interfacing with the public, I think it's got to be a lot more lay terms about, we can use stress and things along those lines. They don't need to know what differentiates one thing from another. That's our job. And we're just still going to walk them through that process. I don't have to talk about, well, you need to meet these many criteria out of the DSM-5 TR now, and that part of stuff. They don't care about any of that. They just know that they're not feeling great, and they would like to experience something better. And that's the part we need to know. And the destigmatifying of that is about being able to communicate that on their level as opposed to And I don't mean like level, like they're not smart enough, right? I mean,
Mhm.
the language that they typically use is a really important part of that.
I agree with you. So as we begin to wrap up our time on our newly broadcast called Perspective, is there a final message that you would like to share with the audience as it relates to Mental Health Awareness Month?
Ah, that's a good question too, Beverly. Um,
We've said it all a lot, but anything you want to reiterate, say
so,
to the audience.
so I would say that, and this might not sound very mental health oriented, maybe it is, maybe it doesn't, is make sure you have fun in your life,
Mhm.
right? Make sure that whether you're a clinician or whether you're another professional in another profession, or whether you're, a carpenter, doesn't really matter. Make sure that you're having some fun in your life, and that's going to be related to the people you're around and the things that you're engaged in. And if you can do that for the most part, you're probably in pretty decent shape. When you start not having fun and you start feeling bogged down, those are indicators that something's off, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Whether it's anxiety or depression or whatever the heck it is, those are indicators that things are off. And just like my light goes on in my car to tell me that my wiper fluid's low, or that my oil needs something, hopefully not the check engine light, that's not a good one, but that tries to indicate those things to me. Our body and our brain are attempting to communicate these things to us too. And as long as I listen to that, and when I start to feel not so great, it's just a sign that I need to make some adjustment of some sort. And if you don't know what adjustment to make, go talk to somebody and let them help you figure that process out.
Good point. Good point. So be mindful and attuned to where we are individually, and seek help when you need help in navigating. Thank you. Thank you, Tony, for being our guest on Perspectives during the Mental Health Awareness Month. We appreciate you being our guest, and thank you for sharing your perspective. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Beverly. Enjoyed it. Enjoyed it a lot.